What happens when a celebrity stops performing and tells the truth on live national television? How can one sentence make a studio audience laugh, then freeze, then fall silent? If late-night talk shows were built to keep Hollywood polished and safe, why did Johnny Carson's desk sometimes become the most dangerous place to speak? And was Carson merely the calm host or the quiet gatekeeper who opened the door and let secrets walk out? From 1962 to 1992, The Tonight Show was America's nightly ritual, a controlled stage where stars arrived with rehearsed anecdotes, practiced jokes, and shameless movie plugs. There was no rewind button, no viral clip economy, and no second chance after a remark slipped past the censors. Television was supposed to be safe entertainment, and Hollywood had rules: don't name names, don't attack the system, don't embarrass your colleagues, and never hand the network a lawsuit. Yet a rare few guests ignored the script. Carson would ask an innocent question, then leave just enough silence for honesty to spill. Tonight we revisit 6 appearances where the laughter turned nervous, the air went heavy, and the illusion of perfection cracked long enough for real humans to show through. When Johnny Carson introduced Bette Davis in 1983, the applause wasn't just for a guest, it was for a monument. 2 Oscars, 10 nominations, a face that had stared down studios, co-stars, and decades. At 75, she sat across from Carson with a cigarette and that famous gaze, and you could feel the room expecting nostalgia, a charming story, a witty jab, a tribute. But what if she hadn't come to be charming? What if she'd come to tell the one truth Hollywood never wants on a microphone? Carson asked the kind of question that sounded harmless about careers, about time, about the industry she helped build. Davis didn't soften. "Getting old in Hollywood, you might as well be dead, especially if you're a woman," she said, plain and unsentimental. The audience laughed the way people laugh when they're unsure whether they're allowed to be uncomfortable. Then the laughter thinned. Then it stopped. Carson, usually quick with a comeback, held his smile a half-second too long, as if searching for a joke that wouldn't betray the moment. Davis kept going. "Hollywood," she said, "worships youth and beauty as if they're moral achievements. Men age into distinguished, women age into invisible." She talked about fighting for decent roles after 40, not because her talent vanished, but because the business decided it didn't need women with wrinkles, authority, or complicated inner lives. Was she complaining about herself? Not really. With her legacy secured, why would she need to beg for sympathy? The sharper edge was that she was naming a system. Carson tried to lighten the mood, suggesting maybe things had improved. Davis's eyes widened, and her reply landed like a slammed door. "Improved, Johnny. That's like saying the Titanic improved because a few more lifeboats were added after it sank." The audience erupted again, but this time the laughter carried a different flavor: relief that she'd made the truth sound like a punchline, and fear that the punchline was still a warning. Here's what made the moment electric: Davis didn't drop names. She didn't need to. She dropped the rule itself. Hollywood's later career double standard wasn't a rumor, it was policy disguised as taste. She spoke about the studio system that could make a woman famous, then quietly retire her the moment she no longer fit the fantasy. And she did it without tears, without begging, without the usual talk show bargain of pain traded for likability. How often do you see a star refuse to flatter the machine while it's still running? In 1983, few people on television were publicly discussing sexism and ageism in Hollywood, especially in such direct terms. That's why Carson's silence mattered. He didn't argue. He didn't shut her down. He let the space sit there heavy so viewers at home could feel the cracks spreading across the glossy surface. And decades later, the sting of her words hasn't dulled. The real question is, if Bette Davis said this today, would we call it too negative or admit she was simply early? 3. Shelley Winters. When Shelley Winters sat down on The Tonight Show in 1975, everything about her appearance suggested safety. She was an Oscar-winning actress, well past the point where scandal could easily destroy her, there to promote a memoir. Johnny Carson welcomed her with ease. The audience was relaxed. This was supposed to be one of those comfortable Hollywood conversations where memories are polished and danger stays off camera. That illusion didn't collapse all at once. It cracked. Midway through the interview, Winters reached into her oversized purse and pulled out an old bikini. At first, the audience laughed. Props on late-night television usually signal a joke. But the laughter shifted when she calmly explained what the swimsuit represented: the outfit she wore during a screen test decades earlier. In that instant, the object stopped being playful. It became evidence. Carson didn't interrupt, but his body language changed. He leaned back instinctively, sensing that the conversation was slipping beyond the boundaries of a normal talk show exchange. Winters didn't ease into her point. She went straight for it. Hollywood auditions, she explained, were rarely just about talent. Roles often came with expectations that were never written down, but widely understood. When she described producers offering parts in exchange for being nice, the audience reacted with gasps rather than disbelief. This wasn't shocking because it was unimaginable. It was shocking because it was being said out loud without euphemism on national television. Carson tried to manage the moment the way a seasoned host does: a nervous chuckle, a gentle warning that things were drifting into dangerous territory. Winters didn't miss a beat. Dangerous for whom? The question landed harder than any accusation. The studio went quiet. In that silence, the power dynamic flipped. The danger was no longer abstract. It had a direction. She continued explaining that she survived because she was stubborn and fortunate enough to refuse certain advances and still keep working. Most young actresses, she said, didn't have that luxury. They either complied with the unspoken rules or disappeared from the industry entirely. Winters spoke about this not with bitterness but with blunt clarity, describing a system that treated women's bodies as part of the casting process. She named behaviors, patterns, and relationships that everyone in Hollywood recognized but rarely confronted. Then she crossed the line the system could not tolerate. From her purse came another item, a written list. Names. She didn't read them. She didn't need to. The mere existence of that list was enough to trigger panic. Carson visibly stiffened. This was no longer about discomfort or awkward television. This was about lawsuits, reputations, and a network suddenly aware of how thin its control really was. When Winters asked whether she should read the names aloud, the moment froze. The audience gasped. Carson intervened. The show pivoted. The list never made it to the microphone. And that interruption revealed the true boundary of honesty on live television. Truth could approach the edge. It could be implied, described, even confirmed. But naming names was where the machine snapped shut. Looking back, Winters' appearance feels almost prophetic. Decades later, the same stories would surface in waves, backed by movements, investigations, and consequences. But in 1975, she stood nearly alone, using the safest stage in American television to show exactly where safety ends. What makes her Carson appearance unforgettable isn't just what she said, it's what she was stopped from saying. In that unfinished moment, Hollywood revealed its most important rule: some truths are allowed to be heard, but never fully spoken. 4. Oliver Reed. When Oliver Reed staggered onto The Tonight Show stage in 1987, the problem was immediately obvious. This wasn't a guest about to go off script in a subtle way. This was a man visibly intoxicated, defiant, and uninterested in playing the late-night game. Producers sensed trouble before he sat down. Johnny Carson sensed it too, but the cameras were already rolling. What happens when live television meets a guest who doesn't care about consequences? From the first exchange, Reed refused the rhythm of the show. Carson tried to anchor the conversation with polite questions about Reed's career, his films, his reputation as a formidable actor. Reed brushed it aside. He wasn't there to promote anything. He leaned forward, slurred his words, and asked a question of his own: what was wrong with Hollywood? Then he answered it without waiting. Cowardice, he said. Fear. A system run by people who wouldn't recognize real acting if it hit them in the face. The audience laughed at first, unsure whether to treat this as drunken comedy, but as Reed continued, the laughter thinned. He dismissed modern films as garbage, accused studios of letting accountants replace artists, and mocked directors for selling out their vision. Carson attempted to redirect, mentioning Reed's acclaimed performances, naming respected filmmakers, offering safe exits. Each attempt only gave Reed another target. As his speech grew more aggressive, the truth inside it became harder to ignore. Reed wasn't carefully constructing an argument. He was venting. Yet beneath the slurring and bravado was a familiar complaint many insiders quietly shared: Hollywood no longer rewarded risk, only profit. Reed called directors prostitutes, accused studios of manufacturing mediocrity, and sneered at the idea that integrity survived once money entered the room. Was this just the rant of a drunk, or the kind of honesty people only risk when sober judgment is gone? Carson's role shifted from host to firefighter. He stayed calm, maintained composure, and tried to contain the damage without escalating the scene. But Reed pushed further. He mocked artistic seriousness, joked crudely about honesty requiring intoxication, and laughed at his own recklessness. Drinks sloshed dangerously close to the desk. The tension was no longer intellectual. It was physical. What made the moment unbearable wasn't just Reed's behavior, it was the recognition that parts of what he said rang true. Even viewers embarrassed by his delivery could sense the nerve he was hitting. Hollywood did fear risk. Studios did prioritize money over craft. Reed's problem wasn't the message, it was the method. He had stripped away all polish, all diplomacy, all deniability. Eventually the line was crossed. Reed nearly knocked over a prop. Carson cut to commercial earlier than planned. When the show returned, Reed was gone, escorted off stage. Carson offered a brief diplomatic comment about artistic temperaments and moved on. The system had reasserted control. Reed was never invited back. Not because he insulted Hollywood, that happened all the time quietly. He was banned because he did it loudly, live, and without apology. His appearance became late-night legend, a cautionary tale about what happens when honesty arrives without manners. Reed's segment answers a brutal question. Is Hollywood afraid of truth, or only of truth it can't manage? In his case, the answer was clear. The industry didn't debate him. It removed him. And in doing so, it proved his point more effectively than any sober monologue ever could. 5. Burt Reynolds. In 1976, Burt Reynolds was Hollywood's golden boy. He was charming, effortlessly likable, and riding the peak of his box office power. Audiences loved him. Studios trusted him. Talk shows adored him. When Reynolds sat down with Johnny Carson, there was no expectation of danger, only wit, flirtation, and a few self-deprecating jokes. This was supposed to be the safest kind of guest, a star everyone believed got along with everyone else. That illusion unraveled the moment Carson asked what seemed like an innocent question about working with other actors and directors. It was a classic late-night setup designed to invite praise and diplomacy. Reynolds smiled, leaned forward, and delivered a line that sounded playful until it didn't. Some of the people audiences saw him laughing with in publicity photos, he admitted he would love to punch in the throat. The crowd laughed, unsure whether they were hearing a joke or a confession. Reynolds didn't clarify. He didn't need to. What followed was a masterclass in dangerous honesty disguised as humor. Reynolds claimed he wouldn't name names, then immediately described them in such specific terms that insiders knew exactly who he meant. A blonde co-star who couldn't remember her lines and treated crew members like trash. A director with an elite education who talked endlessly about theory but couldn't stage a shot to save his life. Each description landed lightly in tone, but heavily in implication. Carson sensed the shift and tried to pull the conversation back to safer ground. Upcoming projects, lighter anecdotes, the rhythm that kept late-night television friendly. Reynolds acknowledged the redirection, then swerved right back into critique. He mocked pretension in acting, dismissing process talk as an excuse for bad behavior on set. Acting wasn't brain surgery, he said. Learn your lines, hit your mark, and don't bump into the furniture. The audience laughed, but this time the laughter carried tension. What made Reynolds' appearance so unsettling wasn't anger or bitterness. He wasn't ranting. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't visibly frustrated. He was cheerful, relaxed, almost amused by the discomfort he was creating. That calmness stripped away the usual defenses. If he'd sounded furious, Hollywood could dismiss him as unstable. If he'd sounded wounded, they could label him resentful. but Reynolds sounded like someone casually telling the truth. Behind the jokes, he broke one of Hollywood's oldest rules: never publicly criticize your colleagues. The industry survives on the illusion of harmony. Stars feud quietly, resentments stay off camera. Reynolds punctured that illusion with a grin. He suggested that the camaraderie audiences saw was often manufactured, that behind the scenes many actors and directors tolerated each other for money, not respect. Carson continued to manage the moment, professionally letting Reynolds talk while subtly signaling limits. But the damage was already done. Viewers had glimpsed something they weren't supposed to see: the gap between Hollywood's public friendliness and its private contempt. Reynolds didn't suffer an immediate ban like Oliver Reed. His power protected him. But the moment lingered. It revealed a different kind of honesty, one that slips past defenses because it arrives smiling. And it raised an uncomfortable question: is truth more dangerous when it's delivered with rage, or when it's delivered like a joke everyone knows isn't really funny? 6. Zsa Zsa Gabor. By the time Zsa Zsa Gabor appeared on The Tonight Show in 1983, her reputation had already been written in bold letters. Diamonds, champagne, multiple marriages, unapologetic glamour. America thought it knew exactly who she was. She arrived exactly as expected, glittering relaxed, and carrying a flute of champagne despite network rules. What no one expected was that she wouldn't defend her image. She would own it and flip the judgment back onto the audience. Johnny Carson approached her carefully, as if giving her space to soften the jokes already attached to her name. Instead, Gabor leaned into them. She told Carson she never hated any of her husbands. Some simply had more money than love. The audience laughed loudly, assuming exaggeration. Gabor didn't laugh with them. She clarified. She meant it. Marriage, she explained, was too important to be left to love alone. Carson tried to offer her a graceful exit, suggesting surely some of her marriages were based on affection. Gabor waved the idea away. Of course there was love. She said she loved their houses, their jets, their bank accounts. The audience gasped, then laughed again, caught between shock and amusement. Carson looked momentarily stunned, unsure whether to treat the moment as comedy or confession. Gabor gave him no guidance. She didn't wink. She didn't backtrack. What made this exchange so destabilizing wasn't vulgarity or scandal, it was clarity. Gabor framed her choices not as moral failure, but as honesty. She challenged the American fantasy that marriage must be romantic to be respectable. In Europe, she argued marriage had long been practical. Americans, she implied, simply pretended otherwise. The audience laughed, but the laughter carried discomfort. Was she wrong, or just refusing to lie? As the interview continued, Gabor doubled down. She explained how she trained her wealthy husbands with clear expectations. Men, she said cheerfully, were like children. They needed rules. Hers were simple jewelry, was the price of tolerance. Each line pushed Carson further from control. There was nothing to correct, no scandal to apologize for, no denial to interrogate. Gabor had stripped the conversation of hypocrisy. Perhaps the most unexpected moment came when she undercut her own mythology. She admitted she was never the most beautiful woman in the room, but she was always the most interesting. Beauty fades, she said, but knowing how to make a man feel important and how to make him pay for the privilege never goes out of style. Carson stared. The audience laughed again, but now the laughter sounded defensive. Unlike other guests who risked punishment for their honesty, Gabor risked something different: moral judgment, without shame. She wasn't exposing predators, condemning systems, or venting rage. She was calmly stating how she navigated a world that already commodified women, and doing so without asking permission to be admired for it. Gabor's honesty created a unique kind of discomfort. Hollywood could not ban her for saying what everyone already joked about. They couldn't paint her as bitter or broken. She was neither. She was lucid, amused, and fully in control of her narrative. Her appearance answered a final question about Carson's stage. What happens when a guest tells the truth so confidently that there's nothing left to argue against? In that moment, the shock wasn't what Zsa Zsa Gabor admitted. It was how effortlessly she revealed the industry's quiet bargain and how little interest she had in pretending it didn't exist. It's clear they were never just awkward television moments. At the time, they were treated as scandals, missteps, or uncomfortable detours from entertainment. But with distance, they read more like historical markers points, where the polished surface of celebrity culture cracked just long enough to show what was underneath. Bette Davis spoke about age and sexism before the industry had language for it. Richard Pryor turned a comedy interview into a raw confrontation with addiction, race, and mental health. Shelley Winters dragged the casting couch to the edge of the microphone and showed exactly where truth was stopped. Oliver Reed proved that honesty delivered without restraint would be erased, not debated. Burt Reynolds revealed how easily Hollywood's fake camaraderie dissolves under casual truth. And Zsa Zsa Gabor exposed the quiet hypocrisy behind morality, marriage, and money without a hint of shame. What makes these moments resonate today is how rare they feel. Modern talk shows are smoother, safer, and carefully managed. Stories are approved. Edges are sanded down. Surprises are engineered out of the system. Authenticity is packaged, not risked. So here's the question. If these moments happened today, would we call them brave, or would we rush to shut them down? Which of these Carson guests shocked you the most, and why? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Because sometimes how we react to honesty says more about us than it does about Hollywood.